Hi, Dudley. How are you?
Good, sir. How are you, Martin?
Very well, very well. Great to have you on our program, if that's what we want to call it.
Pleasure to be here. I'm super excited. Thank you.
Amazing. Well, look, Dudley, for the benefit of the audience, it would be great just to get a little bit of background on you, your basically your work history, and what brought you to where you are today in the business value consulting sphere.
Sure, sure. So I started as an actual business value consultant back in 2012, so, quite a long time ago. But at that moment it was actually a career change. I had worked at Fidelity Investments for a long time before that as an actual IT buyer. I was in charge of observability. We called it monitoring back then. But for all of the Fidelity.com environment, it was when online trading was first coming around. I was in charge of basically observability for the entire Fidelity.com infrastructure. The reason why I say that is because I was a champion. Like I was the person that you want to sell on your behalf when you're not around. And so
Yeah.
you know, I held a fairly large budget, so I knew what it was like to be in those shoes. And when I decided to make the change into something else, I had no idea about business value consulting or that world at all. But the person that brought me into that world basically said, "Look, because of what you've done, you're perfect at being able to sit at the table of a customer and just tell them the shoes that you've been in and the things that you've seen, and that brings a ton of
Yeah.
credibility. We can teach you the rest about model building ROI models and stuff like that." And so I did that, and I started out at BMC, which shortly after the Blade Logic BMC acquisition. And so immediately I was thrust into an environment where value selling and that whole world was, very, very strong, right? John McMahon was there, and
Of course.
yeah.
Not only do I know, I've got well, you can't really see it, but the book is really the qualified sales leader is always on my desk.
Yeah, so I came with no preconceptions around a sales process, medic, any of those kinds of things. And so I was a blank slate. I absorbed it all with vigor and hunger and appetite because I was super excited about it. And so I learned value selling and the whole kind of BVA and the value consulting role, in my opinion, biased opinion, from the best.
Yeah.
And so I'm lucky to start there. And then I just kind of cut my teeth in various ways. BMC at the time sold a lot of different things, including, Remedy and help desk systems and mainframe type environments. And so I learned a lot about how technology and features and functions can actually map to business value. That's really where it was. And then after BMC, I went to App Dynamics. And so at App Dynamics, that was a super fast growing, like incredibly fast. That's kind of where I would say I cut my teeth on volume. Like I think, and if any of my ex-colleagues are listening to this or end up watching this, I at one time got the award for doing the most BVAs in a year. I think it was something like 86 or maybe
Wow.
90. It was
Wow.
like super high volume. But that kind of repetition, that kind of visibility into every kind of deal, small, large, medium, people that liked App Dynamics. It was people that hated it, competitive situations. I basically saw it all there, and that was really fun. Tons of energy. That's where I kind of met some of the most amazing sellers and BVCs that I've ever worked with, and I learned a ton after that. The journey continued. I tried my hand at some startups and where I'm at right now, and took what I learned at App Dynamics and BMC and tried to apply that where they didn't have any value selling or any value practice, and I'm brought in to start up a value practice from scratch and get everybody on board and do that thing. I'm now on my second iteration of that, and I think it's going quite well. So here I am. To say that I've been around the block is kind of an understatement, but I really love it. I love the coaching. I love the mentoring. I love the talking to the customers about their challenges and helping them solve them. And I love seeing technologies that actually work and help customers solve problems.
It's really interesting that you went from the buy side, from Fidelity Investments over to the sell side. And when you joined as a BVC, did you have every salesperson at BMC come to you to get your thoughts on what, like, how would you see this? If you're on the buy side, what do you think? Would you get like were you the guy they would all go to just to kind of run things by before going to procurement or yeah,
100%, Martin, 100%. And so since I'm based out of the Boston area, I'm close, we're close to New York, and it's a financial services kind of center. And so anybody that had any deals or meetings at any of the financial services company, whether it's here in Boston or down in New York, wanted me at the table basically to just talk. They wanted
yeah.
me Yeah, they wanted me to just say, Dudley, just tell them what you've done and that you've been in their shoes, and
All
how
right.
how
So you
you
were the
solve.
ringer. You were the ringer.
Yeah,
You were brought in to make them feel comfortable and let their guard down so they could come in
yeah,
and
and all of the projects that we would be brought into to talk about were things that I'd already done at Fidelity, and they're like, oh
sure,
God, I had believe it or not, this might sound like cheesy or whatever, but I had champions and people in our accounts calling me like on the side personally asking me to go through some things and how'd you do this and
of course.
what was it like there. Yeah, it was. I think the credibility factor was very high.
It's really interesting you say that because it aligns with some of the things that we're seeing even today, which is it's called sales enablement, but actually today the world of sales is going towards buyer enablement
Yes.
because it's such a complex space. And within the buy side, there's so many stakeholders. When you're dealing with a champion who maybe has never even bought what you're selling, a lot of the time they may feel intimidated. They may be cagey simply because they're afraid of not knowing what to share, what not to share. So there's a whole area now that whole evolution of this market in trying to build a buyer enablement cycle where you're helping your prospect to buy better, not even maybe starting your solution, but the why this part of the three whys, right?
Yes, and that there's a lot of kind of tangents that we can take there. And in my experience, a couple of things, right? It's like IT, I would say in my experience is very very experienced in buying things. Like IT in general usually buys their solutions off the shelf, or they don't really, it's not like a development organization where dev teams are generally used to building their own things, either whether or open source, or they're not really experienced in that buying journey. So there's a big difference there when it comes to buyer enablement between the IT person or and the development person, but both I feel can benefit from, and it's been one of my philosophies or whatever you want to call it, is if you can just have a frank conversation about what the engagement is going to look like, let's go through how this journey is going to unfold. We're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. This might be a spot where we might need someone else to come in and help us, right? Like I feel like if you explain that process to whoever you're dealing with, your champion, hopefully there's no surprises, right, on their side. They understand what it's going to take. They understand they might need to get other people involved, which is almost always the case, especially in large enterprises. It's always kind of a buying by committee situation. But I feel like anytime you could help them understand what that journey is going to be ahead of time, whether you're doing it manually or whether it's doing it through a solution like your own, that I feel like goes a long way in making them comfortable, as well as building that relationship. Like you're trying to get them to come along with you, willingly in that journey. And I think anytime you can open up and be honest and upfront and anything like that goes a long way.
And I think in the case of your experience with BMC, I can totally understand that value, right? To let the let the buyer connect with another former buyer so that they can speak the same language.
Yeah, right. And just to help them understand that there's no hidden agendas. Here's what you can expect. No one's trying to you know sneak up on anybody, or what I mean. It's not subversive in any way. And by being a buyer for quite a long time with a relatively large budget, I can come to the table with an idea And I think that makes them feel comfortable on the other side that I've been there, and that I'm not kind of, I'm not saying anything that really is out of turn or that I don't know about.
And having been in a number of companies now, in the role of BDC, what is it that made BMC such a legendary company in the space of value selling? Was it the John McMahon playbook, or is there more to it than that?
I think it was a maniacal focus on sales process. Now, I know that is the John McMahon playbook, but there were some other folks in there that had come from companies like PTC, and some others where, frankly, that's kind of the genesis of value selling and business value analysis and things like that. And I think that they made it, the sales leadership made it their mission to get everybody to buy into a process that on paper and throughout history has worked, but to trust them as sales leaders that this process is going to work. And frankly, it's going to make you a lot of money as a seller. As soon as that started happening kind of a little bit at a time, it just everybody was like, yeah, this is it. This works, and I'm doing it.
And how long did that process take? Because I can imagine, you see some crazy stats out there even today. Something like 70% of value selling initiatives fail at organizations for a number of reasons, right? A lot of the time, it's just the adoption, the confidence that reps have in changing their, if it ain't broke, don't fix it methodology or mentality.
Yeah, I think it takes, I mean, from a time perspective, it's probably a full fiscal year. I mean, we're going through something similar at my current company, MinIO, where we're ramping up kind of our value selling motion, and it might take us 3-4 quarters to get everybody enabled and on board. And I think that that's kind of what it takes, because in my experience, sellers are kind of a show me group, right? They're not going to buy into anything unless they see that it works or that it actually works for them in
Yeah.
reality. And so they have to see that something works before they'll probably buy into it. And you're always going to have folks that have their way, they're set in their ways, and you just need to do the best you can to get them on board as much as possible, while still allowing them to do the art of it in their way. And I think that, that could take 3-4 quarters probably.
Yeah, and sometimes it just needs to drop in their heads. Like there needs to be a great example that we've seen with our product is there tends to be a misconception of when to use a business case,
Mhm.
right? A lot of the time,
Mm.
and a lot of the time when we roll out across different companies, they'll initially have a view of business case as a closing tool,
Yes.
and that's categorically wrong. The business case is, from our experience, is something that used from the very beginning as a value hypothesis. But that does mean that means that reps need to actually change the process of when they introduce that value hypothesis, which is the bones of the skeleton of that business case through the process, and how to introduce it. And when they suddenly have a new approach that may deviate a little bit from what they've done today, that may be working, maybe not 100%,
Yes.
but maybe working. You know, the thing that works the best is that their colleague next to them, sitting next to them, starts to get those wins. And once they start to get those wins, and they see that it works, then that competitive,
Yeah.
natural competitive nature the reps have tends to help bring the masses, so to speak.
100%. I agree 100%, right? For folks that do what I do, we know that the value story, if you will, starts at the very beginning, right? I mean, it's kind of in discovery is where you kind of hear things that lead you to ideas around where the value is going to be, at the end. So if you start building that story up front through whatever means, you start with your research and you build your value pyramid. I don't even know if they call it that. I'm dating myself by saying the value pyramid. But
So,
anyway,
as long as you don't call it a process audit.
no, 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 please. I think if up front you're starting to educate yourself or
Mm.
the ecosystem as a whole into why these folks might be interested in your solution, meaning where's the value going to be for them. And so that business case, it starts at the very beginning. It may morph, it may change, there may be things added or subtracted, But if you have that point of view up front and any opportunity that you can get to kind of have the conversation with your champion around what you're seeing so far, I think goes a very long way into, again, building the relationship, perhaps even differentiating yourself from competition by going through this kind of a process, which I've
Yeah.
experienced firsthand, and making your champion kind of along the way buy in and hopefully and ultimately be able to present or talk about this information when you're not there, if that's the
Yeah.
case.
And that's key, right? Because ultimately the business case is for them. It's not our tool,
Has
right?
to be. Has to be. Again, for the folks that do what I do, we don't like estimating or using kind of generic data. That's it. We can't, the thing doesn't work
Yeah.
unless one of two things is happening. It's their own data and they've agreed and everyone's on board with that, or we've agreed to a baseline or a best guesstimate because it's just not possible to get the data. If we have one of those things, we're in good shape, and either way, we're going to move forward.
One of the things that we're seeing an increasing trend in, and probably as a result of the macroeconomic conditions, albeit things have improved over the course of the last 6 months,
Yep.
is a lot of the companies we work with, they don't tend to lose to competition. They'll lose to status quo or indecision. And we know, just we estimate that something like $1.4 trillion of lost potential sales every year due to buyer indecision. Where have you seen the value selling process help to combat indecision, and how big of a problem do you see it?
First of all, I think the value or the no decision or the status quo is like the great blindsider,
Yeah.
right? Like, right, like a lot of sales folks worry a lot and spend a lot of mental time thinking about competition and competitive situations. And can I get a battle card? Or can I get some bullet points on why we're better? There's a lot of mental effort that goes into that. And I think one of the things that isn't really focused on a lot is the do nothing, right? Like there is comfort for a lot of people to not spend money because they're not spending money. It's really easy to not spend money versus spending money. I think where the value process and the value selling methodology and business value consultants come in is being able to paint the picture of the pain of not doing anything, right? Right off the bat, I think you've been engaged as a vendor for a reason. I think if you can expose that reason, you can probably unearth some pain as to why somebody might want to change, because people tend to not change unless it's painful, right? That's kind of the impetus around doing anything differently in your
Yeah.
life, is because it's too painful to do the other thing. So I think that if you could unearth that and show what, the art of the possible, if you will, it's a term that's used a lot. If you were to change this particular behavior or situation, this is what it might mean for you. If you can do that up front with, we mentioned before, like a value point of view, here's where we think the impact might be. If you don't do that, here's what might happen. For example, we today I work in helping customers deal with very high costs of public cloud storage. Okay, they have a lot of storage in the public cloud, and if you're in a situation where you're moving that data around from place to place, and you need a lot of like storage that's easily accessible, those costs are going to become painful. Okay, you cannot do anything. It's very hard to do something because those cloud vendors have you kind of locked in there in a lot of ways. That can become a very untenable situation. And so that's a very easy pain to illustrate, because you're just going to show a graph that goes like this in terms of costs, and nobody likes to see that. The trick is when it's kind of on the edge and it's a little bit of pain, and the customer isn't quite sure, is it painful enough? I think it's our job to illustrate the value of moving forward, but again, the challenges and pains of not doing anything, and try to get them out of that comfort zone.
That's always a trick, right? That
Very much.
comfort zone. And having come from one thing is buyer decision. The other one that I used to hate, I still do, but in my previous life, I used to hate it because of the nature of our product, and maybe you'll be able to shed some light on this, is a buyer build, the infamous buyer build threat, where your buyer suddenly comes and says, "Look, we looked at this internally. Why wouldn't we just build it?" And I'm sure, one, how often did you use that card when you were on the buy side, and how often was that genuine?
At Fidelity, I think it was either a maybe a 3 or a 4-year cycle of buy
Right.
and then build, and then like literally, I think it was like you could time it. And it all kind of had to do with kind of who had moved into senior leadership positions. And
It's a philosophy, right?
yeah, it totally is. Is that a buy versus build? Um, that's it. Like I mentioned development organizations at the beginning of our meeting, and they tend to be build people because that's what devs do.
Yeah.
Is they build things. I'm a proponent of a buy, not just because that's that's how I make my money and that's the business that I'm in, but in life I think I'm more of I'd rather have somebody else do this thing for me because it's their specialty, and I frankly don't have the time because I don't know it. You know what I mean? Because you need to take the time to learn it and then do it, right? I think that applies, right? I think that for companies that aren't necessarily in the business, let's say, of SaaS technologies, or maybe they're not in the observability business, but they want to build all their tools. Like I'm not a believer in doing something that's out of your wheelhouse, even if it initially is cost effective, because I feel like you're going to end up spending more money in the long run than you would if you bought a pre-canned, if you will, or off-the-shelf solution. The whole kind of cloud phenomenon back in the day was just that, right? I mean, that was what public clouds were doing for you. They were taking care of everything. You were
Yeah.
buying infrastructure, you're buying databases, you're buying monitoring. You're not doing any of that yourself. I'm a huge believer in that. Don't tell my bosses today because we're in the business of trying to talk people out of that today, but I'm a believer in the buy. Is there a merit and place for build? Absolutely. I think as a company grows, it becomes unmanageable and untenable, in my opinion.
Yeah. I feel like, can I get you on speed dial whenever I have one of these calls and I need somebody who can provide that relatability to higher bills?
I'm with you. I'm your man, Martin. Call me
You could
anytime.
charge an hourly rate for that kind of service.
You know what? Between you and me and everyone else now listening to this, unless we bleep it out, I might just do that.
It's a bit like, Chris Voss, the Black Swan Group. That's this kind of service, right?
Sure.
Support on the sales side.
Yes,
Great
sir.
book, by the way. So you mentioned something that was really interesting, which is you did you've done the big corporate thing, right? You were at Fidelity, then you were at BMC, then at AppDynamics, which is Cisco, right? Cisco
Yes,
company.
sir. Yes.
And then you've gone into startups and you've built the practice from the ground up.
Yes.
How much of a challenge is that, and what is critical to success when you join probably a company that's never had BVC? Clearly, they've identified the need for it, but what are some of the headwinds you may have faced in just introducing this? And yeah, I think that experience, I'm sure, would be very valuable to our audience.
Yeah, so it's tricky because there is a danger of coming in too early in a startup's kind of life
Mm.
cycle, if you will. And even though the leadership and maybe even the board has kind of decided or alluded to that they want to get a value selling motion going. Maybe they've been product led growth up until a certain point. Now they want to go sales led, and that's a whole different motion. And we're going to need to do value selling, even though they might have said that, and everybody's kind of leaning that way. You have to be, in my experience, very careful about bringing someone like myself in too early. Number one, everyone that does what I do now, we are expensive resources. I'm not gonna, that's a known thing. And so there needs to be a lot of support and kind of pre-work done around what is our, who are we selling to? Who are our buyers? What are our personas? Let's get an idea of why they buy, and let's make sure that our go to market is somewhat solid, because if that stuff is soft or not there at all, the value consultant or the value engineer, whatever you want to call them these days, is going to end up having to participate in all of that work up front, which, don't get me wrong, it's fun. I loved it. I like doing it. But if you don't intend that person to be involved in that stuff and you're thinking that they're going to come on board and just start cranking out value assessments and business cases and things like that, there's going to be a disconnect there. I would encourage leaders and founders of startup companies that are thinking about this to really think about where they are in their go-to-market journey, and are they ready to start value selling both from a customer standpoint and from their existing sales team standpoint.
I know it's a bit of a broad question, but what would you say are the main criteria for, or a threshold at which you're ready for the BBC practice?
Know who your buyers are. Like, know what your
ICP.
personas are, right?
Yeah,
ICP, know why they buy. What are the pains and challenges that you're selling to them on? Okay, why are they? And have an idea of whether or not some of your early customers have actually received that value. Like, do a
great.
little bit of that kind of value realization stuff up front. I would say that's the main criteria, and that senior leadership across the board is not only bought into the value selling kind of methodology and what it takes, but is willing to support that that methodology in every single aspect of the company's go to market, starting with marketing, right? Starting with top of funnel, starting with, if you're going to roll out new features and functions, why are you doing that? What problem are you solving, and what is the value of this new feature? Like, so get product and engineering involved in starting to think about attaching value to anything new. I think those things are key.
And size of team, of GTM team, that would be kind of minimal for BBC really to.
So when I started at MinIO, the team was, I think, 4 or 5, product led growth, meaning more of an inbound. And
Mhm.
then a couple of 3 or 4 months after I joined, we hired 5 or 6 enterprise sellers. So a team of about, 10, 12, with 5 or 6 of them actually doing outbound enterprise motion selling is probably the minimum. Less than that, and you're talking about probably not enough volume to support someone like myself. Here's what I would say, Martin, and you're going to like this. There's a handful of companies out there that do kind of consulting around value selling, and
Sure.
Tom Pacello obviously is someone that I know very well. His business is, I think, in a perfect position to maybe have a conversation with a founder or a leader around, before you go ahead and hire somebody, why don't we talk about creating a value framework, creating an ICP and why people buy, and kind of creating that foundation for you in some kind of a term contract or whatever, so that when you do hire that person, there's work that has been done for a lot less cost, obviously, than hiring somebody and having them do that. But it sets them up nicely, and it gets leadership understanding and involved in the process around attaching value to the
Great.
entire organization. The other thing I'll say, and this is the part that you're going to like, I think today's value platforms and solutions and tools are have come a really, really long way since the days where I first started looking at them, and they can also do a very good job of going from quite simply setting up a foundation that starts, frankly, at discovery. I mean, you've got tools out there, including Simbi, that can get reps involved in value selling in a programmatic way right at the beginning. Okay, that really helps somebody like myself both illustrate the power of it, as well as somewhat automated, if that's what you want. And you can handle, in my case, I'm looking to do that for inbound kind of down market type sellers that are selling at much lower licensing costs, but their volume is high and their touch is
Exactly.
super low, right? So let's get value point of views and things like that for those people.
We call that the productivity dilemma.
Yeah,
how can I deliver the degree of value selling while not sacrificing the volume or size of pipeline?
exactly. And then all the way to the enterprise person where it's going to be a higher touch and it's a little bit more
Mm,
complicated. And then to be somebody like me would be involved. I think today we're at this point right now from a value consulting perspective where we've got a great breadth of solutions to help us start a value practice from scratch, in my opinion. And it comes from consulting services to tools. I think those things should be utilized a lot more, in my opinion.
I, uh, I agree
I know.
wholeheartedly. Dudley, I have just a couple more questions for you. I think running short of time, and thank you very much for all of this information and insight. First question is: of all the places you've worked, who has been the best value seller you've worked with?
The one person that comes to mind is no longer he's now a CRO. He was a seller when I was at BMC, and that's Marcello Gallo. Marcello is now the CRO at Sigma Computing, but when he was carrying a bag, so to speak, he was one of the best value sellers that I have ever seen. He was able to very quickly make the customer feel super comfortable around the fact that back in that time that BMC and Blade Logic could solve this person's problems. I mean, he was very good at figuring out all of the different players that need to be involved. Built like champion building was off the chart, like off the chart good, like off the chart good.
People tend to forget that part, the champion building.
I'll never forget it because I've seen some folks like Marcello do it really, really well,
Yeah.
and it just makes so much of a difference. Yeah, Marcello gets the gold star for me.
Amazing, thank you. And from your peer universe or mentors in the BVC space, who was the best one you've ever worked with?
Yeah, I'm gonna do some honorable mentions. My mentor when I my boss and mentor when I started BMC was John Morton. He's not in the business anymore. He's retired, I believe. So John Morton was one of the best value consultants, value engineer folks that I'd ever seen. And then I'm going to make a shout out to Joe Marcantonio and Brian Segulich as honorable mentions. I mean, these guys are top folks in illustrating value and making it actually be the process be a differentiator in the selling motion of their particular companies that they work for.
Fascinating. Both fantastic guys. I also wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah.
Dudley, thank you so much for your time, for your insight. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have.
Thank you, Martin. I really did enjoy it. And anytime you need any chat or advice from me in the future, please
I'll
don't
make
hesitate
sure.
to call. All right.
Thanks, Dudley.
Thank
Cheers.
you. See you.